Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Higher Ground podcast. I'm very excited to have a longtime friend, John Goble, join us today. John is a managing director at Accenture, leading strategic initiatives within the North American high-tech practice. With over 35 years of experience in high-tech B2B firms, John is an expert in digital transformation, product-to-solution migrations, and profitable growth for the tech and software industries. Based in the San Francisco Bay Area, John specializes in helping global technology organizations accelerate their recurring revenue. How did I do?
Yeah, that's a lot of corporate speak. I agree.
Yeah. So what do you really do, John?
What do I really do? High-tech firms have hardware and software. That's kind of how we at Accenture define high-tech. And a hardware software firm more and more is looking to grow the software portion of their business, and specifically the subscription portion. So the practice I'm in focuses on how do we help you do that? Marketing, sales, finance, distribution, etc.
Understood. What do you think the hardest thing it is for for software and hardware companies to move to that subscription model?
Historically, the hardest thing has been a hardware-centric company had a very specific way of doing business. They were good at it. They dominate. The ones that are left dominate their industry. And so now they are trying to break into a software or cloud-based industry, a lot of times using the things that worked for them really well for the hardware business. Might not always work. Compensation plans for sales reps, how you sell it, how customers want to buy it, billing, distribution. Hardware is sold differently and distributed differently than software. So it's modifying the practices, preserving what worked in hardware and adding practices that will work for software.
I see. I remember, because I'm old, we used to buy hardware or software and then you'd pay, the one-time cost, generally in the millions, right?
Yeah.
And then you'd have recurring, you'd have the recurring maintenance. It would get you upgrades. It would get you, whether it's software upgrades were the obvious things, but I would imagine you'd have hardware contracts that would have fixes and things like that. But the subscription model, I guess, takes the monthly cost, takes the total cost down and just spreads it out over time.
It does that. The easiest example I've found is streaming video. Whether it's Amazon or if I'm not getting value at the end of the month, I'm not going to give you my $17.99.
That's right.
Right. I'm going to cancel it. Yeah. So if I've finished the season that I was watching and there's not a new season or new value for me, I'm going to let it go. And I would say subscription software is the same way. I need to continually get value month to month over what I'm paying for. There are some stickiness in corporate software, right? There's some things that you can't get rid of as easily, but the pressure is on the provider to continually add value.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. It's way easy to turn off Spotify or actually for me, it's impossible to turn off Spotify, but like between the, preponderance of Netflix and Apple TV and, all of the different models, all the different, the different subscription models, I have too many. And it's funny because as soon as they raise their prices, it's like, okay, do I want to continue the investment?
Right. Now, some of them are really good at what I'll call customer success. Some of them send me an email, in my case, every Friday morning.
Okay.
We noticed you were watching this last week. Based on what we know about you and your watching habits, we recommend you watch this.
Interesting.
It's Friday night. We tend to watch Friday nights at our house. So they're now, in case I miss the value, they're demonstrating the value to me. Implicit is, by the way, end of the month, please give us the $17.99.
Yeah, right. There's continue subscribing. I mean, but that works for consumer facing. I mean, it must be interesting challenges in your world, right? Because you've got to do that. You're not going to send somebody a message saying, hey, you had our consultants on, at your location on Thursday. How did we do? I mean, that's a little.
Right. And for our clients, right? So our clients, they're looking at, how do I get the renewal? And this is B2B software in my case. So this is back office software. At the end of the term, we need to help them demonstrate to their buyers, you use this many licenses or seats. Now, by the way, AI is changing the AI and seat model radically. So we've got to figure that out as well. But they've got to demonstrate to people who buy or subscribe to their service, what was the consumption, what was the usage, and what was the value derived?
The value. Sure. I would imagine that you just planted a seed that, so if I am building agents to act on behalf of Tom Castriota as a subscriber to SAP or whatever the service, I'm a software guy, so I'm thinking more like software, but whatever those software subscriptions, Google Workplace or, whatever the subscription might be, do you see emergence of AI agents acting as, individual users? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Really?
And it's starting in customer success, right? So
Okay.
that's where it's starting. What used to be called customer service,
I see.
1-800, it's broken. I'd like you to fix it. Now there's lots of things that there's hardware companies that have software, and hardware will call you. Hey, we noticed your printer, your device, your hardware, it's getting near the end of its useful life. We predict it will fail in this time frame. Therefore, we've dispatched a technician. We've brought the repair part. We've swapped it out for you under your service contract, and we're just letting you know.
That's amazing. Yeah, that seems like a really good use.
That is a radically different model for a hardware company who can now use AI in a subscription model, in services to show value.
You don't even know what happens, right? It's one thing to have your paper show up on time. It's a whole other thing to have your printer essentially fix itself, right?
Great.
That's fascinating.
And it could be printer. It could be, I worked with an air conditioning company. The HVAC company can predict if the chiller or blower has a part that's going to go out. Large skyscrapers, they can't tolerate hot water not running, cold water not running, air not blowing.
AC, yeah, sure. I'm particularly, I get very grumpy when I'm warm. Yes, I'm not interesting. Well, we kind of jumped right into it. I do want to just sort of backpedal just a moment because I reminded myself, around when I said the air conditioning. One of the questions I like to get to know John a little bit more, right, is do we do the this or that? The standby for me is, pizza or bagels, highly controversial in New York. I don't know how controversial it is on the West Coast, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. This, pizza or bagels?
Pizza.
Boom. Just quick. Yeah.
Now I'm born and raised Californian, so I have a different.
Well, then I think I know the answer to this one. So beer or wine?
Wine.
Red or white? See, I had to add some twist to it, John.
White.
Interesting. Okay. I was expecting red. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I thought I'd throw you off, Tom.
You did. I appreciate that. So that was this is the one that prompted me. So are you typically too hot or too cold?
Too hot.
Too hot.
Constantly too hot.
Same. Okay. Nice. We'll go with some brands now. Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Boom. I love the decisiveness here, John. Very nice. Let's go with something maybe a little more ambiguous. How about a planned event or just spontaneously go for something to do? And I got you thinking, so that makes me happy.
Planned event.
Okay. But it did require a little consideration.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then last, working alone or with the team?
Oh, with the team.
I kind of knew that one too. Consulting is such a team sport, right? It's the kind of thing that if you don't love working in a team, it's
and even before consulting, when you and I worked together, it was, you can get more done with more people.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And a more diverse thought than you ever could by yourself.
And I love the diversity statement, right? Because you get so much more out of a team that doesn't think like you. You know, and I don't just mean the obvious demographics of, the classic white male. I mean, literally the breadth of backgrounds, the education experience, who was in the military, who's got, different, socioeconomic backgrounds. I think you get just this great diversity of thought. So that's good. Appreciate that. And then, so being in a team sport, right, in a consulting environment, I imagine your teams, there's a lot of volatility in terms of stress levels, and you're working with high performance individuals. How do you help cultivate a culture that really prioritizes both high performance, but also this notion of continuous learning?
Yeah. And consulting is an interesting industry. Consulting has constantly every year early in career folks joining, whether it's right out of school or whether it's transferring in. And so they've got a different background level, experience level. And the whole point is to grow. The whole point is to help grow your replacement. So on the teams that I'm on, we've got, it can be very high stress and the clients can be demanding. At the end of the day, though, when the stress level is low, what are we doing to recoup, to regenerate? And one of the things I do, especially with the early in career folks, a lot of acronyms in industry can be crazy. And it's industry specific. You and I just mentioned the words HVAC, right? Yeah. So what is the H and the V and the A and the C? So we will spend quite a bit of time in the evenings. I ask folks on the team, jot down any acronym that didn't make any sense. And we'll go through as a team, what did the acronym mean? And what's behind the acronym? So it's not just to know that P&L means profit and loss, but what is important about that? And why was that important in the context of the day where it came up?
Of that particular meeting or with that particular person in the client's team. I think that's great. The tendency in technology, but in business in general, to have your own vernacular, your own jargon.
Right.
both it's useful to have the shorter conversation, but at the same time, I also think sometimes it can act as a artificial barrier to entry. I remember when I first started in financial services, I had the dictionary of financial terms. It just went with me wherever I was. And I didn't always feel comfortable. I did eventually. I got more comfortable with myself as I progressed in my career, but I felt I avoided asking, what do you mean by settlement date? And what's the difference between trade date, value date, settlement? That was one that sat with me for quite some time.
Right.
The more experienced folks would have loved to sit me down and tell me that. Oh, let me explain it. This is what happens and that,
Right.
Please.
And I think, they would have loved to sit you down with that. So I think creating the environment where you give them freedom to ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
And don't be afraid, if I ask, there will be a bad connotation.
Outcome.
I was supposed to know it or I'll get punished. It's an acronym.
Or even not knowing what the thing is, like I like the fact that you didn't just explain it, but it's the context that matters so much, because it might be different. P&L might mean something different to the treasurer than it might to the CFO. It probably doesn't, but that's a bad example, but yeah, interesting. So tell me about your background, right? So you've got an electronic engineering degree. How did that specific degree, you think, help you through your years? Were there principles that you carried forward from that?
There were, and I went to a school in the West Coast, Cal Poly, specifically Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, whose trademark motto was learn by doing. So it was a very hands-on, lab-centric school for any major. Agriculture, business, engineering, they're all very hands-on, learn by doing, experiential. I would say what it taught me mostly is how to find an answer when there isn't an answer, right? A lot of things didn't exist. I guest lecture back on campus, and somebody said, well, what has changed? And I said, well, when I went to school, there was no Google. So somebody had to invent Google, right? It was a solution to a problem. So what's the method you went through to create the solution to the problem when the solution didn't exist yet? So it was the method and the process, I think, that I took away quite a bit from electronic engineering, especially since I probably pivoted out of that role directly 3 years after graduation.
Where did you go to after that move?
I went to product management of the systems we were at. And then I went from product management, and I got closer and closer to the customer. I went product management, sales engineering, technical sales, and then I moved back slightly. I got a little frustrated with the materials I was getting as a sales engineer, as you can appreciate. And I didn't find the information I was getting from headquarters to be useful. So I went back a little bit to work on that. Then I went into marketing, and then finally into consulting, where I got to leverage product management and marketing and sales and engineering, which has served me well in consulting.
I remember distinctly myself, what I carried forward into consulting, because I had a nice run. I enjoyed it. Learning by doing financial services and similar, we obviously we share commonality across the sales engineering front. And at the time, I never really worked in a product role, but were engaged heavily with the product management folks, constantly working on movements. And we were in the field, let's try this. Can we do that kind of thing? So that was, I felt those days were super interesting in terms of how that feedback loop of client X needs this. Well, how important is client X and client Y needs this? And, you do those trade-offs, but can we somehow morph those A and B into the same thing? That was the hard part, right?
Right.
Now, switching to, you volunteering work. I know you'd mentioned that you'd done some volunteering work as a computer science teacher. What did you carry forward with you in terms of doing that you could, were there lessons there that you could carry into the corporate world?
Yeah, that was a program that was sponsored by Microsoft, where folks in industry could go teach in a high school. So I taught a year-long introductory computer science course to high school freshmen.
That sounds amazing.
Very, very hands-on course, very hands-on. It had a really cool product that we used to teach that. One of the things I took away from that is really breaking down the problem. And you could read, it's easier, even right now with you and I, it's easier to read faces. So in the classroom, I could read a student's face and I could tell that didn't make sense. Didn't land at all.
Yeah, yeah.
So I also got a tremendous respect for teachers. I had no idea how much time goes into lesson planning. Oh my goodness. I spent, on average, I was inefficient. I probably spent 8 to 16 hours for every hour of lecture. I don't think you could do that as a career teacher and survive. So I got an appreciation for that. Sure. But getting ready was another thing I taught, especially in meeting with clients, is to prepare. and be ready and use that time wisely. We only had an hour in the classroom and oftentimes with the client. So preparing and using that wisely.
And how to make sure you're maximizing that block of time that you have. Right. Yeah. I find often with corporate meetings, my day-to-day consists of meeting after meeting. And sometimes 30-minute block is just not even close. It's not even close to enough yet. Finding an hour slot is almost impossible.
Right. And that, I remember that changed in COVID. COVID is when the 30-minute meeting in my world showed up. Pre-COVID, they were always in-person meetings, and we had to have time to get from one place to the other, moving conference room to conference room. COVID for me was the introduction of the 30-minute meeting.
Interesting.
Yeah, that would never work if you were teaching or explaining or having a working session. A working session in 30 minutes would be really, really difficult.
Yeah, no, the working sessions for sure. I think that's something that, I'm finding it to be it's very challenging given slice. And now I'm seeing 15-minute meetings show up on my calendar. I'm like, I talk about preparation. Like, I don't have that many non-working hours to get ready for,
right,
even
right,
if it's, the math just doesn't click, doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's, time management is definitely a challenge in getting that focus. So maybe let's shift gears a little bit towards some interviewing questions. I like to help our audience out with some tips from the field or tips from the experience, the folks' experience that have been through this. A personal favorite. What is the weirdest question that you've ever asked or been asked, or both? We can cover both.
So it still haunts me to this day. I was asked, and it was late in my career. It was 10 years, maybe 15 years ago. I was in an interview, and the classic brainstorming interview question was, why is a manhole cover round? And that was a question you would get asked. And the answer was classic. To see, could you come up with more than one answer? It won't fall through the hole. It was easier to lift. It was maximize the use of resources. You can roll it. I got the equivalent of that, but it was, times 10. How would you count the number of passengers on a commuter train if you can't physically count them or count their tickets?
Okay.
And you and I could go, I could derail this conversation. It's haunted me to this day. I've got several answers. I've talked to my wife last night and I said, what do you think? And she had a couple answers.
Yeah.
But the brainstorming questions, I find them interesting. I find them useful. I'm not sure how much they would tell me that a candidate could do the job. And to me, the interview, personally, when I interview somebody, I have a role to fill. I have a problem I need to solve. And like we said earlier, I need somebody on the team to help me solve it. I can't do it myself, because if I do that, I couldn't do something else. So really, when I'm interviewing a candidate, it's, could you do the job or the role that I'm interviewing you for? And so the more you can show me, I've done it before and I have these skills and I will apply them to this problem, it helps me in the interview. The train question, I'm not so sure.
Not so sure though. Yeah. Do you come into that? I want to poke on this a little bit. So I'm with you, by the way. I'm literally looking at giving you. Well, let me ask you this question. I was going to give you the answer. My answer. Do you come into the interview expecting to filter the person in or filter them out?
Wow, what a great question.
I get lucky sometimes, John. There's like a light you can find, dark gymnasium. I'm not that guy.
Filter them in and filter them out. I believe I'm looking for a person who will fill the role, so I'm probably looking to filter them in.
Bring them in, right? Yeah, that's my answer too.
Yeah.
But I have that, that to me, the train, there's also another one that I love, which is something, how many ping pong balls can you fit in a Boeing 730? It's the same concept in area, right? There's, in my experience, there's only one wrong answer, which is, I have no idea. I won't even guess. I won't even give you my thought process.
Right.
But then there's when you start poking at the logic makes no sense. Like, is this person able to frame the problem and set it in such a way that it's defensible?
Right.
The accuracy is going to be wildly variable for something as what's the word? Something, that time and space problem or just space problem, and becomes very difficult. But registering their logic is something that you could potentially use either way.
Yeah. And I think that is, if I got to that point in an interview and I had asked all my questions, I could ask that. Every question I ask personally, there is a skill that I'm looking for baked into the question. And a lot of times there's not a right or wrong answer, but I'm looking, demonstrate that skill. But you're right. I have no idea wouldn't be an answer I would expect.
It was the manhole cover was one. You see the fear in somebody's face. I'm like, okay, let's try a different one.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Another personal favorite of mine. It's kind of a silly one, but I still enjoy it. What's the most memorable excuse you've ever heard for being late or missing an interview?
Some of these I can rattle off tip of my tongue because they were so memorable.
Yeah.
Years ago, decades ago, I was interviewing a person and they needed to fly in from another city for the interview. It was a short flight, an hour and a half. And the time came and they weren't there, and I called their cell phone and they said, "Oh, I've been in a car accident and I'm in intensive care."
And they're answering the phone.
And I thought, but you're answering the phone. And so I said, "Would you like to reschedule?" "No, I don't know how long I'll be in it." I think they got caught up in a series of white lies and it got worse and worse. And so it was just, okay, then it's probably best for both of us. If you don't want to reschedule, we'll let it go. Yeah.
Wild. Okay. I've not had that. I've had a bunch. That's not one.
I mean, there's been flat tires. There's been, a lot of them are just, no, okay, life happens. I get it.
100%. Yeah, no, everyone gets that one pass.
Yeah.
That's
the ICU is, having never been in an ICU.
Same, but I'm pretty sure my cell phone is not at my side. That's good. Okay. So is there any particular worst experience you can share either for yourself or for a candidate? I like the example you give, something that haunts you to this day. I mean, we could use that one maybe.
Well, what haunts me to this day, in college, I interviewed they were on campus for a high-tech firm. And they said, "Did you go to our session last night where we reviewed a bunch of things?" And I said, this is true. I couldn't. I had homework, right? And so in the interview, they asked about product X, and I tried to bluff my way through product X, and it was clear that I was bluffing. And at least the interviewer was gracious enough to say, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think you prepared for this interview. It was very gracious. It could have gone much worse, but I was excused about 10 minutes in the interview. That one still, I think it traumatized me so much. It's caused me to over prepare for things. I don't ever want to have that happen to me.
That experience. Oh, that's a gift they gave you.
Yes.
I also think I've heard this from particularly in sales, some common sales management that we've worked with before, that their philosophy was it's kindness to the candidate to just, we don't have a fit. And whether it's capability, whether it's personality, whether it's match, we don't have a fit after 10 minutes. And I have to say, in my past experience, sales managers we've worked with, that was almost their credo, right? It was let them know quickly that we don't have a fit, whether it's a skill mismatch or a background, or there's just not a personality click. I think that from my perspective is the best thing you can do for a candidate. And it gives them the opportunity, I think, particularly in a sales role, is to say, well, can you help me understand why? That's a way to potentially turn it around.
Right.
But then again, there's not a fit. It's usually mutual. So at least that's been my sense. This is a tricky one. Sometimes candidates or employees may get, what's the word I want to use? Emotional when they get feedback like that. Maybe it's feedback you're not a fit, or it's a performance review where there's an impotence mismatch between expectations and performance. Any thoughts on that? Have there been any particular situations that come to mind around that and how you handle it?
Well, first, we've got a senior partner in our firm, Dawn Anderson, and her phrase is feedback is a gift.
I can't agree
more.
I
truly believe that. Good, bad, or otherwise, feedback is a gift. So to the extent that I can encourage others to tell me honestly and give me feedback, then I can act on that.
Exactly.
And if I do anything to shut off the feedback, among other things, it makes me consciously or unconsciously not want to give future feedback, because that would be the reaction.
Totally.
I think emotionally is different though. And I have had one person, I was on a team with them. They got feedback from their supervisor and it really upset them. They thought it was unfair feedback and it really riled them to the point where they were in tears. So they were telling me and they got emotional again. And so I just thought, do you want to talk about the event where you got the feedback, or do you want to talk about the feedback itself? Because the two are kind of different. And they were still so emotional. I thought, well, this is not the right time to be discussing feedback. So I finally said, would it be helpful if we just took a break and came back tomorrow? And so I asked them. Now, it turns out they said, can I just have 30 minutes? got a glass of water and came back. I think at that point, it became less emotional and more of a rational conversation that we could talk about the feedback. Secondly, it was in private. I've seen people give feedback in public. I've heard the phrase praise in public and give the constructive feedback in private. Even then, some people are uncomfortable being called on stage to get an award. So the public feedback, some people, it's not their style. It might be my style, but it's not theirs. And so we have to work through that. But constructive feedback, always in private. There's no reason to shoo somebody out in front of a team. It's not useful.
Yeah. And it creates that dynamic where you're not going to listen. They're not going to benefit. And it's going to be, particularly in the case of a lot of folks, it can be very triggering as you described.
Yeah.
I like the way you frame that though. Do you want to talk about the feedback itself or or how it was delivered? Is that
how it was delivered? And I will agree. I was there. I thought the way it was delivered was not optimal. So I agree. The way that was delivered was not good.
Was not helpful.
Now, it turns out, in my opinion, the feedback was valid. And so we talked about that separately. And I think that was useful.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not the what, it's the how of the message. Yeah, that's fair. Interesting. Yeah. So when you're looking for a candidate, you're in a situation where you've got, I don't know, folks who are very close in terms of capability. What do you really look for that might differentiate the two? Again, maybe they have similar or different backgrounds, but you'd say, I would hire either one of them. How do you make that tough call between the two?
It's changed for me over the years. I would say early in my career, I looked for fit on the team. They fit with the team, with the culture fit. But I think you have to be careful. That could be a bias where you get groupthink. Do I think they're like the others already on the team? And am I adding one more person onto the team like the others?
Point.
And I don't think that's valuable. So I think I have shied away from purely on just do we have a fit, if you will. I'm not sure I've had people, when they use the phrase all things being equal, rarely have I had all things being equal.
Oh, really?
I have had where I can't figure it out, and I will actually have another person more than was scheduled, another point of view for the interview. And I will bring in somebody with a very different style than mine, because maybe that's what's blocking it. So
interesting.
That's probably what I would do.
Yeah, because you're in the situation where another pair of eyes, another perspective. I like that you're targeting someone unlike you. That's good. Yeah. How do you think candidate could stand out differently or make themselves more, again, they don't know their competition, so it's kind of an unfair question to ask you. Let's change it to let's make it a little simpler. What are some ways you've seen candidates stand out in a positive way that you said, okay, there's something particularly useful, interesting, good about that style?
I learned from a candidate, and it's now changed how I interview. The candidate said, let me just tell you the important parts of my resume for the role you're trying to fill. And I thought, I don't have to guess. They're just going to tell me the answer. And so they flat out said, I think if you look at my resume, this bullet and this bullet and this bullet are directly related to the role that you're trying to fill because.
That's
so
fantastic.
I think candidates that walk me through the salient points of the background. The other, large companies in general, to avoid bias, will really anonymize candidates. They don't use the pronoun. They don't use they're just referred to as the candidate.
TC. Yeah, we use TC a lot. Yeah.
And so a lot of the notes are very clinical. So anything somebody can do to tell me a story, to make me remember them, in addition to being qualified for the role. I remember, if you ask me the most memorable interview, I had a candidate recently from Columbia, and they were a third-year chemistry student. And in their internship, they worked in a lab trying to cure brain cancer. And so the candidate was a lab assistant curing cancer. And I thought, you really are curing cancer. And it's like become a phrase that people use.
Yeah.
But they really were. And I thought when I was a third year, that was not something I was doing. So I think students in general are so far advanced, but that story stuck out with me. And they didn't do it in a bragging way. They just explained what they were doing. And they explained it to me in a language that I could understand, although I know they had a clinical language that was far more sophisticated than what was being used with me.
So those 2 points there, I do genuinely appreciate that story on two levels. One is the ability to synthesize and articulate in my language, but I don't have the clinical background or,
Right.
outside of my jargon space. I think that's amazing. But I love what the candidate did with let me tell you what I think is the connection point, right? I think that is something that is just a very, very powerful way to differentiate yourself. I've not had anyone do that. And I've interviewed a lot of people.
Right.
And do you find yourself asking them now, what are the 3 bullet points you would look at your resume that you think match?
I do. And there's candidates will often get asked either tell me about yourself in the beginning or at the end, is there something I didn't ask that I should have? There's an opening and closing question, which is really framed as this is your opening and closing argument in front of the jury.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the opening argument, using that time to tell me where you grew up and what your hobbies were and what your interests are is not as powerful a use of the time as I'd like to tell you why I think I'm the best candidate for the role you're trying to fill. And I think
direct.
At the end,
be direct like that. Yeah.
And I love at the end, it was kind of, you were talking about the sales manager. I love the person closing the sale at the end. John, we've talked a lot of things today. If there's nothing else you take away, these are the 3 things I'd like to make sure you take away from our conversation. Wow, thank you. Because now
Thank you.
I guarantee you, I will pick up my pen and write 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, write them down. Yeah, especially when you give it as a bulleted list like that, because it's not enough to say, I think you should hire me.
Right.
Well, duh, or you wouldn't be here. No, that's really, John. Thank you. Those are some great tips, I think, for folks who are out there. It's tough right now, right? Differentiating yourself, getting out there. I'm hearing from more and more friends of my kids' age groups that are, how difficult it is to either get in that first gig. Any particular advice to that person who's trying to crack into a big organization like an Accenture, or like I can make the same comment about Google, things like that. But
right.
What would your counsel be?
I can answer this so quickly because I've been asked this question, and so it's tip of my tongue. First, I really would stop sending out resumes blindly. I would stop going to a website, looking at a job posting and submitting a resume. It can be so frustrating. And firms, big and small, get so many resumes. They become a second tier stack of candidates if they can't fill them from their first tier stack, which is references, which is networking. So the early in career folks that I work with, I tell them, go onto LinkedIn and find a friend of the company you want to work at and have them recommend you have them recommend you for the posting. Among other things, large firms give referral bonuses. So a lot of people are quite happy to have a conversation. And if they think it's somebody they would refer, they will refer your resume. But blindly sending it can be really frustrating. I know somebody that sent 50 and didn't get a response. Wow. It can really take a toll.
Yeah. Saying no that often is hearing no that often rather is it can be demoralizing for sure. Yeah. And how do you I mean, I get we can move over to the when we think about sort of what a candidate prepares for, right? A lot of times we'll spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, John's got this posting. I need this. I need to have these things versus what really matters. They'll look at a role. It's in a sector. It's a high tech. It's in your practice. And they do all sorts of research about your customers and things like that. Is that worth it? Because you can over prepare.
Yeah.
What's a way to narrow that so it's more effective?
Is it worth it, and how to narrow it? I think it's worth it to a degree. If I give guidance to my younger self for that interview with the high tech company, I should have researched and prepared.
Okay.
So that was a table stake that I missed and I was excused. So yes, researching and preparing, knowing what the company does that you're interviewing for. They don't expect you to be a PhD. So know enough that you've read the website and you've researched it and you know what they do. I think to narrow it down, the candidates that are focused on the role or the problem I'm trying to solve versus presenting the best version of them. So changing their focus from inward focus to outward focus.
Right, look at me, I'm great. What is John
look at me,
need?
I'm great. I have all these. I'd like to show you all the bullets on my resume, not just 3. I'd like to show you everything I've done. And then I'm sure you will figure out if I'm a fit. I think and we just used it previously. candidate that says to me, I'm the best fit to solve your problem because narrows down all the bullets on the resume to the ones, and then just tell me the answer. I'm really busy. So in the interview, just tell me the answer. But it's an inward versus outward focus, I think, is a shift.
It makes a ton of sense. You're basically giving the people what they want, giving the interviewer what they're looking for. And like you said, you're busy, everyone's busy. How do you essentially cut to the chase? I think even as I asked the question, I realized don't know that it's an over preparation problem necessarily. You don't have to necessarily over preparing is not the issue. Prepare, be ready, dig deep, but then be ready to explain your match, your fit, why it matters to John, to Tom, to whoever is the hiring manager. Yeah, I like that.
Right.
I like that. Is there anything in particular that you look for that when you meet the candidate in person that, you'll see the CV, right? You look at the resume, okay, this person looks like a good fit. Maybe you do a quick phone screen, you see them in person. Is there something in particular you're looking for in that in-person experience that's not necessarily visible on paper?
And it's interesting because during COVID, there were so few in person. So now we're shifting back to that. And so I'm thinking before COVID and after COVID.
Yeah.
I don't want to use a cliche, but I'm going to use a cliche. Being present. I think candidates that show up and are excited to have the conversation.
Interesting.
Everybody will be nervous. And so I'm expecting that. Fine, be nervous, right? But you're prepared and excited to have the conversation. I think goes a long, long way.
It's true. I remember you just reminded me of a piece of advice that I got, a silly, simple thing that I don't remember even who gave it to me. When you're sitting across from your interviewer, your butt should be on the edge of the seat, not in the back. You don't want to adopt a casual posture. You want to be engaged. You want to be present. Like you said, you want to be really part of that experience and like locked in, maybe not creepily, right? But in a way that you're obviously showing engagement and interest. I forgot about that. Yeah. It was funny when I first, I did my first internship. I think it was Clairol, the hair products company from a million years ago. They were part of Bristol Myers Squibb. I think that's right. And the council, they were prepping us, interview candidates to get this, to go through the interview process. And they gave you all of these little tips. Like if you go out to dinner, I actually remember these very well. If you go out to dinner with someone, just salt your food. I don't know if you heard this one, right?
Before you taste it. Right?
Before you taste it. And I was like, it seems so, you're not going to hire me because they salted my food without tasting it. And I was like, well, why would you salt your food before tasting it? It seems rather rash. I guess habit. Yeah, interesting. Feedback we talked about before is one of those things. I think one of the hardest things as a manager to give is that difficult feedback, right? You're not at the bar. How do you go about that conversation, a difficult conversation?
I use an approach that a lot of folks do, which is a sandwich. Good, constructive, good. Mm-hmm. The other thing recently, if it's going to be really tough, I will give a little heads up. We're going to have a difficult conversation.
That's good.
And it allows them, so
they move around.
It allows them to get ready mentally for that. So that's something I've shifted to. But then these are things you're doing really well. Here's an area you could work on, and here's the ramifications of not working on it and the benefits of working on it. It's your choice, right? To go back to my mentor, Don, this is feedback. It's a gift to you. What you do with the gift is up to you. So here's something to fix. This is what will happen if you do. These are the repercussions if you don't. And then ending with another positive. I look forward to working with you on this. I like the other parts of what's going on. I think it's great. This is something to add to it. Part of that is there's no reason to just demoralize somebody and just, it's not helpful.
I fundamentally agree with you. I have worked in organizations who are like, that's baloney. If they're not doing well, just give them they're not doing well and let's move on. And I fundamentally disagree because I don't think we're machines. You want to give this person, you want to frame this in the context of, you still have a job. We're not going to just, there's the door kind of situation. Right. We want them to make sure they understand that, they have feelings, they have emotions, they've got situation going on. And a lot of times I preface those tough conversations with, how's everything else going on in your life? Is there something intruding on this?
Good.
Your performance is not on the right track. And here's the areas, like you said, this is where it's working. This is where it's not. I think that's a wonderful framing. But the idea that there might be some externality that's happening that could be interfering with your usual level of productivity. Because sometimes, it's quarter over quarter over quarter, everything's been great. All of a sudden, it's not. What changed?
Yeah, and going back to something earlier you said, right? It's not make one mistake and you're done. I mean, can you imagine any sports team if the athlete made a mistake and they cut them from the team? That's the coach's job, is to coach you to be a better athlete, not to cut you at the first mistake.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. What in the spirit of management and having we've all had good managers and let's just say some others. What do you think some of the most important characteristics of a good manager are?
Well, I'm going to go into the coaching, right? So a good manager, I think, is going to coach you as a person to get better. I think a good manager benefits when the team does well. So to the extent the manager can give credit to the team for the work and encourage the team to work as a team to get the work done, it's in the manager's best interest. I had a really good manager early in my career, and they were just really honest with me. And it wasn't to be mean. It was, I'm not sure anybody else has told you this, but here's some feedback I think you need to hear. And they gave me this feedback, and I thought, boy, upon reflection, I didn't know. I was blind to that. Thank you. But it was tough feedback.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to give and it's hard to receive. But I'll go back to your senior partner that said basically it's a gift. And if it's received that way with the spirit of growth and intention, it can be a wonderful gift. It can be life-changing, career-changing. Yeah. And over time, our perspectives on management change. What would you say things you looked at earlier on in your career that may have changed, in the last fill in the blank? It's interesting. We all have this marker in our lives, this COVID marker, pre and post, right? I don't know if that's applicable, right? It changed a lot of dynamics, but I don't know if that's changed any of your management or if it's just been more of a steady progression.
I think where I'm outside of those, under my direct span of control, more coaching, because I think that got lost somewhere along the way for some people. And so I think that is something that early in career folks need and benefit from, is just non-direct line of management coaching.
In your organization or outside or both? Some combination?
Both, inside and outside. I meet with folks at Accenture that are not on my team, and I meet with folks from Cal Poly. I meet with folks that graduated and went to other firms, and they, hey, I want to run something by. I had somebody run something by me, and I said, no, that's not right. So what you're describing, no, it's important for you to know that's unusual. It's not the norm. Let's role play a couple of ways you feel comfortable talking about it. So they get to experiment, like
in a safe space.
Of your direct management. I would like to encourage those that report directly to me to feel comfortable doing that. But it's hard, I know, for someone to always feel that way. So.
I love that. And that sounds like a very good culture to be a part of, where you've got that flexibility to have those conversations. I think, like you said, the ideal situation, they're in your chain of command, or they're in they're in your org, right?
Right.
But it's safer when you're not. And
right.
I've run through a number of scenarios with someone who's one of my mentees, she's in a different org. Well, wider org, she's in another part of we're a big org, so she's in another part of the big org. And we've run through a bunch of, what would you do in this scenario type thing. And it's very useful it's a very useful exercise, because I'm coming at this with no emotional investment other than I want my mentee to do well. And I've had friends come to me with, it's funny, more recently I've had a few friends come to me with this, hey, there's this idea somebody came to me with, and harebrained sometimes is a nice way to put it. Tell me how this would work for you. It sort of play that back. Like, how do you see this helping your career, your direction, your, things like that? And having them try to visualize what that outcome would be if this event were to take place, or this product were to go to market, or this scenario were to play out. I found that to be very useful. A lot of times they're asking you, what would you do? But then if you say, well, how do you see yourself in this situation? It becomes easier for them to connect to, because they're putting themselves into that spot. I've been enjoying doing that. I've been to a couple of organizations over the years. The employee review process, it seems to be different in every organization. I'm just from our conversation, and I haven't asked you this question, but I believe I'll take a guess here that you put high value in the review process. And I'm curious, a couple of dimensions, the level of frequency, how to make them effective, or what you've seen that could make them potentially more effective.
Yeah. I think every company I worked for had an annual review process. So it was a written down, formal summary. This is what you've done well. These are your areas of improvement. These are areas of growth that could benefit you in the future. I think a year is way too long to go in between. If the point of the review process is to help you improve, again, I'm going to use that sports analogy. Hey, athlete, I'd like you to think back 7 games ago when you made this move. And the athlete's going to say, 7 games ago, I forgot breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's got to be timely. It's got to be relevant. What I encourage folks to do is get feedback as much as you can. Is it every 2 weeks if it's really important? Is it once a month? So you can act on it and improve, because what's really great is at the end of the year when the review was, this person was given this feedback 6 months ago and they have actively worked to improve, and here's the results now. That's a fantastic review, right? It shows you took the feedback, you saw a problem, you worked on the problem, you found a way to improve it. That's a great review. But getting something once a year in writing, it's not as useful.
It's not useful. Yeah, we have a practice where we have a one-on-one check-in with our direct reports every week. It's not a review necessarily. It's a check-in. It's 30 minutes. How are we doing? Kind of thing. And within the confines or the auspices of that model, inherently you'll have those types of conversations where, look, I'm getting this feedback about you in this situation. There's another situation where such and such happened and you excelled, or you didn't address this correctly. You can have those much closer to real time. But I do think there's value in structured. I think what we do is Bridgewater did it too. We do it twice yearly, with the big one being at the end of the year, whatever that timing lands on. But then a more formal sort of mid-year, like halfway through the month, which I find useful. It's almost like 2 formal processes. The downside is it's exhausting for a manager. You got a lot of those to do. So but I think the value is there.
Yeah. And then, I've learned to be very careful with the term micromanagement. Micromanagement has been inherently viewed as a bad thing. I think there are cases in early in career folks where you just don't know how to do the skill. You haven't learned it yet. And somebody said, I'd like you to go do this thing, and you don't know how to do it. I think more frequent feedback sessions there are useful. Hey, Absolutely. Did I get it right? Or did I get this right? Or this part of it right? So I think more frequent feedback there can be perceived as micromanagement, or it can be perceived as micro-coaching. There's a point where the person can say, I got it. And boss, you can back off, right?
Yeah.
I know what to do. We don't need to check in that much. But I think early in career, more feedback is useful when you're learning a brand new skill.
That makes a ton of sense. I like that. Switching to data, which I know we have a lot in common over the years. We've done a fair bit there. How has your perspective on data management, data quality changed over time?
I think I had an altruistic, I forget what the word is. I had a naive view of a centralized, single customer record. And it will be, how hard could it be?
How hard could it be, John?
Right? And it goes back to whether it was called master data management or whatever it was a single record, and we're gonna federate the whole thing. Actually, we're gonna bring it together. We're gonna not federate. We're gonna bring it together. I think over time, my naivete has caught up with the reality of just politics of a company. Organization A keeps their data because it's important to them on the marketing, has their view of the customer for this reason. Sales has their view of the customer. So I think to naively think marketing and sales are going to give up their data and put it in one master place, I'm not sure how realistic that is. And so the question now is, okay, how can they get their needs met while getting some kind of commonality to do a search between them? And I do a lot with firms, when they're going from hardware to software, and we talk about lead management. Marketing generates the lead. They run it through the marketing system, generates the lead. They send it to the Salesforce automation system. What were the fields involved, and are they common between the marketing system and the sales system? Because you track fields for different reasons, for different reporting, for different KPIs. I think focusing on that What were the KPIs and fields each of you needed? And yet, what's the minimum you need to make them work together? I think is probably my shift in the view of data.
My friend Tom Redmond was on the podcast, I think, last season. He has a book about the contract. If you think of data as you just laid it out as a supply chain, right? I'm going to be taking data. Marketing is going to be consuming maybe from outside sources, or they're going to be pulling together, this content that they then have a contract to give it to sales. And then sales, right. But a lot of times sales doesn't care about what give me the leads, give me the content. I don't care about, that information. And then they'll put the orders into the system. And then the order folks, all right, whatever sales, I don't care. I don't care so much about your needs necessarily. I got what I needed to place the order, and then it goes off to manufacturing or whatever the rest of the supply chain is, right?
Right.
What Tom was talking about, which I loved, is this notion that it's a contract that works in two directions. The idea that you're just handing off this data, you were like sort of insinuating, here are the fields they care about, but where's the feedback loop to say, if you just gave me these three more things or this one other piece of information, we could streamline that. And he's got a whole book about it, so that's just the simple concept. But mine has changed as well. And the distributed nature of data and systems is just expanded. It was naivete on both of our parts to have that same, because I shared your.
Right. Now, and then my particular practice at Accenture, in the subscription model, okay, so marketing's got theirs and sales has theirs and order management has theirs and billing has theirs and customer success has theirs. But customer success now has metrics like churn that are important to sales, because maybe sales is paid on churn. So now I've got that assembly line of data used to flow left to right.
Right.
Now it's a circle. With entry points coming back right to left. So the data from customer success going backwards, or customer success is giving information to product management. Hey, you built it thinking it's going to work this way. Our telemetry metrics are showing it's not being used at all. And that feature has a 0% adoption. So how do we get that data back into the same record? So,
Do you have that? I mean, do you see that level of telemetry down to that level of granularity, like what features people are using within their software?
Yeah, much more so in business to consumer, B2C, much more so. I think B2B is lagging a little bit, but B2C, absolutely.
Sure.
Telemetry information is going all the way back. Feature adoption. I mean, look at my streaming. I get that email Friday night. That email is coming from marketing. So the engineering team or the production team that's doing the streaming took telemetry, sent it back to marketing, who has my email address, so they could send the telemetry back. I think more in B2C, right? So wireless companies are doing, streaming companies are doing it, retail companies are doing. I think B2B is rapidly catching up.
Yeah, I would imagine when you're thinking about a feature set that we just invested thousands or even potentially millions of dollars for customer X, for segment, right? It wouldn't be for an individual customer, but for your whole segment, right? That suddenly, if you're not seeing usage, we wasted this massive investment and our product people made a bad call that could be expensive, or the opposite. You don't know if it's wildly successful without that telemetry.
Right.
Yeah. So last question I would say is on the product quality front, whose responsibility well, I guess I don't know if this is a fair question, but in corporate systems where I spend a lot of my time, where it's not so much consumer, who do you think is responsible for users of a system for data quality? Is it the product's responsibility? Is it the user's responsibility? Where do we draw the line?
In my idealistic world, I'll use a simple example. In the idealistic world, the product should see that I'm entering a 6-digit zip code and say, wait a minute, I won't just accept it. I'm going to reject that field saying, wait, zip code should be 5. I'm going to do not the +4.
Yeah, but John, come on. We got to get the data in. John. Friction. You don't want to introduce any friction. We want to get that data in. That's an order.
So, Tom, from a manufacturing lens, from a hardware lens, problems that are found earlier in the design phase and earlier on the manufacturing line are far cheaper to fix and far less damaging than a defect in the hardware later.
Yeah.
I'm going to apply the same analogy to data. Yeah. Data corrected early is far less damaging and easier to fix than data propagated 18 times later.
Fully agree.
That's my idealistic view.
No. It's accurate too, because like I appreciate the creation of friction and the fact that we do want to get content in as quickly as possible. But I've done this, when you put phone number in the name field or vice versa, and I'm going with easy entry, like that's an easy example.
Yeah.
The system maybe shouldn't block me, but it should kind of say, is this right? Just at least raise a flag that says, I'm not so sure you meant to do this. Can you confirm? A little friction.
And it's funny how we all are accepting if we enter our social the wrong way, our phone number the wrong way, if we don't have an @ in an email, if the zip code is more than the wrong digits, we all are accepting of that friction today. It's just understood.
Yeah, because we're doing data entry every single day on every single thing we do.
Right. Can we evolve that analogy to more complex forms of data? Right. I would argue yes. If we solve the social security friction, we can extend that and evolve into a much more complex.
I agree.
This is my ideal view.
I agree. No, listen, that's where we have to have that ideal vision and slowly work our way towards it. So thank you. I think we're aligned. Now, my last question, if you were to give your advice to your younger self, younger John, what would that advice be?
Twofold. I would enjoy what I'm doing in the moment. There were many, many jobs I had, portions of my career that were just fantastic. But I was so focused on getting to the next level, I didn't enjoy where I was, which leads me to the second piece of advice. Don't go it alone. Get a mentor, get a coach, bounce ideas up. I got advice early on from somebody, you can't be a sales engineer forever. You're going to have to grow up and get a real job. It's a young person's job. That's what I was told. I loved being a sales engineer.
It's one of the most fun I've had in my life.
Loved it.
Honest.
Loved every part about it.
Yeah.
I should have checked that one piece of advice with at least one other person and have them go, nah, so get multiple advice
points
on your
of
career.
Yeah.
And enjoy where you are at the moment.
I love it. Very zen answers, John. Thank you. Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule, and thank you for the counsel. Thank you for the advice. Wonderful conversation. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's my pleasure. Whether you're grinding through yet another job application, navigating a tough work environment, or just trying to level up your career, you've found your show. Each episode, I sit down with guests ranging from the C-suite to folks just starting out in their career for honest, unfiltered conversations about interviewing, managing, and everything in between. No corporate spin, no polished PR answers, just real conversations, real stories from people who've been there. This is season 2, and I'm so glad you're here for it. A quick note, all opinions are our own and don't represent any current or past employers. And if this sounds like your kind of show, then please hit like and subscribe. And once again, thank you for joining us.